I will guide,
Sorry, Laura.
not a problem. I will guide and you will find. Next. First, we're going to talk about church records. Church records are a possible substitute for vital statistics registrations, particularly for the pre-1920 time frame. In those times, not everybody registered or even knew that they were supposed to register births, deaths, and marriages, but also it was horse and buggy kind of a time frame, and if events took place in the wintertime, sometimes the records didn't actually find their way to the RM office, who in turn would send them into the provincial headquarters. Another thing to remember is that in the early days up to 1920, not all the questions that we know or would like the answers to were being asked. If you go and have a copy of Tracing Your Ancestors in Saskatchewan under the Vital Records chapter, there is an excellent section showing which questions were asked during which years. In other words, save yourself some money. If they didn't ask the question, you may not want to pay the $60 or whatever they're asking for these days for a registration. The other thing about church records to take into consideration, are they historical or are they current church records? This will depend on whether or not you may or may not have access to them. Next. Before you really get into church records, you need to know a few things. And the first one is, which denomination did the event take place? In the earliest days, meaning in the 1800s in Saskatchewan, there was only the Roman Catholic Church had missions, the Church of England or the Anglican Church, the Presbyterian or the Methodist. As more settlers arrived, they would bring their clergy with them. And of course, at that time, there would then be more churches established. The other thing you need to know is the type of information that is recorded. If you're dealing with the Anglican Presbyterian churches, they had very limited information. In fact, the records look much like the records that you get from England today. They would ask in a baptism, for instance, the name of the child, the day they were baptized, the name of the parents, but not necessarily the maiden name of the mother, the occupation of the father, the day that the event took place. On the other hand, if you're dealing with the Roman Catholic Church, they had more rules and regulations, and they had in Europe, for instance, and in Quebec, took records for the civil, were also doing the civil records at the same time. So that if you were looking at a baptism, for instance, baptism was the most important sacrament at the time. And so you would have the day of baptism, the name of the child, whether it was male or female, when it was born. Was it born today, yesterday, last week, a week ago? Whether it was, if it was a few years after they were born, it would say approximately how old the child was. It could also say that it was baptized today, but it was born on, say, the 16th of the current month, or last year, or this sort of thing. It listed the parents, including the maiden name of the mother. And then, of course, the names of the sponsors. But read every last detail. And I will help you with that, the reading of the documents a little later. When you dealt with a marriage, it listed, of course, the bride and the groom, whether they were a major or a minor, meaning whether they were older than 21 or under 21 years of age. It would give the name of the father and the mother with the mother's maiden name. It would also include such information as if the parents were dead, but not necessarily. Sometimes they were dead and it didn't indicate that, but that's an important clue to look for. And it also would name the sponsors. Sometimes in the marriage record, in the sponsor's name, they would also suggest that this was how the sponsors were related to the bride and the groom. So it's possible you could find 3 or 4 generations listed in a marriage document. Now, when it comes to the burial records, you were in God's hands, so they no longer had control over you. So that those records tend to be pretty sparse, but they do list the date of burial, the name of the person, sometimes their age, or they will say about the age of, and they will say who the witnesses were. Because before they buried somebody, they would have somebody there to confirm that they were dead, and this is who they thought it was they were burying. The other thing you would need to know probably is what language was used to record the event. This can be important, particularly if you're reading the record yourself. Are you able to translate it? If you're asking somebody else to look for the record, do they understand the record, the language that's being used? And again, I'm going to go into that a little bit more later. Next. Another important thing to always keep in mind is, where was the church that this event that you're looking for located? A good place to look is in, if you don't know, our directories. And I've given you a URL there for the Peel's Prairie Province's directories. They are online. Pre-1905, you're looking for the Henderson directory for Manitoba and the Northwest Territories. They have every little community that was established at the time the directory was written. They tell what the churches were, if there were schools there, who the important people were, how far it was to the local telegraph line, and where the post office was, and where was the nearest railroad. After 1905, when we became a province, many of the major cities had directories, and they have copies there for those. You may also look for the Wrigley's directory in 1921, which has all the community, not all the communities, but many of the communities in Saskatchewan. And again, it would tell you what churches were found in each community. Another place to have a look is for the newspapers. And I've given you an address there. The archives had a project to digitize the local newspapers during the war years as the celebration for the 100th year ending of the First World War. There are quite a long list of newspapers listed on that page. Many of them, although they were digitizing the war years, for many of the newspapers, they go back to the very beginning of when the newspaper was first published. The newspapers in the early days were what I call canned, which meant they would get a copy of whatever was going on in the world at the time, and somewhere in the newspaper they would have room to put a local column, and that's where you're going to find the name of the church. But remember, with the newspapers, they only sold newspapers to people who were going to appear in the newspapers. So maybe all the information you require is already in the newspapers, or certainly the newspaper will give you a date, so that if you're going for a church record, you will have a date that you can be looking for. Don't forget to also look for ethnic newspapers. Certainly, one of the newspapers that is in this collection is Der Courier. That was the German newspaper that was published here in Regina for all of Saskatchewan. There are local columns there and local news with all the local news. It is written in German, but you can figure out what the name of your community is called, and you certainly can figure out what your name is, even if you don't understand the German script. But I'll be telling you more how you can find that out too a little later. One of the best places, though, to look for local histories are in the local histories. The SGS has a large collection of local histories. Check the library catalog to see whether the one you're wanting is there and can be borrowed. Another place to look for is Library and Archives Canada. I know that we tend to use the archive section more than the library section, but it should not be overlooked. The law then and for years and years has been everybody who published a book had to donate 2 copies to the library, and one is for the stacks for so that there always is a copy around, and one to borrow. At the library website, it'll also tell you which libraries have copies of that particular book. One that I did not put on the list here is one you can use in your search engine. Put the term World Catalog. The World Catalog lists books from around the world, and it too will tell you where copies of a certain book are found. Next. Not only do we need to know where the church is, we need to know where the record could possibly be found. It may be still, if it's a current record, in the local church. If the local church closes, maybe the book is found in the local diocese. When the book was full, they often were to deposit the book in the diocese. But of course, the clergy aren't famous for also following rules, so it could be anywhere. The churches also were to have fireproof safes that they were to keep their records in, but that didn't always happen either. So we're hoping that if it isn't in the local church, that there is a record in the diocese office. Another important place to look is the Provincial Archives of Saskatchewan. They have the records for the Anglican Church and the United Church here in Saskatchewan. You aren't going to be able to see the books yourself. The Anglicans have appointed a person who is in charge of checking the records for you. The United Church, remember, was formed by the Presbyterians and the Methodists. Their records also are at the Provincial Archives and currently are being indexed. Now, here's an opportunity for any of you who are looking for something to do. They're looking for indexers. You have to go to the archives to do the indexing, but maybe you can earn some karma, and maybe the book or the pages that you're given to index may contain the records that you're really looking for. Next. I'm going to mention now FamilySearch.org. This is the filming arm of the Family History Library in Salt Lake City. And many years ago, they microfilmed many Catholic church records here in Saskatchewan. And these records are all online at this point in time. Now, I have had the page bookmarked for years, but the other day I looked and I thought it's not quite as easy as it used to be to find things. But when you get to the page where you are to put in your historical information, if you scroll down, the next window that comes up is called Find a Collection. There, enter the term Saskatchewan Catholic Church Records, 1846 to 1857. Now, the years and things will, the title will come up long before you get down to the years. Now, don't get too excited about this, because 1846 is the first record that is in this collection. It actually is Lac Brochette, which is a community in northwestern Manitoba. And the first records are the marriage records at at Isle La Crosse. So it's a mission church that covered the northern part of Saskatchewan and the various little or not so little communities there. 1957, the records do not go up to 1957, but the latest entry is 1957. And the reason for that is before you could be married, you have to have a record to prove you were baptized. Now, if you weren't part of the current parish and you had to apply to another place to get your baptism certificate, beside where you were baptized, in the margin, they would write that you married so-and-so on this date in this place. So that's where the 1957 comes from. At that time it was called the Genealogical Society of Utah. They microfilmed the church records up until that time, but their privacy rules at that time were they were only allowed to have them available to the public to 1912. And all these records today are available online. And if you go into the Saskatchewan church records, if you hit that place, it'll show you that there are 32 communities for which they have the records. And if you enter the name of the community, it will give you all the information about what years are covered and what years are available, not necessarily what years are covered. And then you can, some of them are indexed, a lot of them are indexed, some of them aren't. But at least if you know a year, you can look at the records yourself. Next. When you're out Saskatchewan, the other thing to do is to look for the wiki page. And they used to have it across the top, but they've moved it again. But anyway, you're looking for Wiki Saskatchewan. And that will give you all sorts of information about what kinds of records are available, not only on the family history site, but throughout Saskatchewan. And they have divided it into those that are available online and those you have to go to the office to look at. The other thing about the wiki that is so important is if you go to the wiki page and you see all of that, but on the top right-hand corner, there is a search place. And in there, enter the words genealogical word lists. And just scroll down the page, and what you're going to find there is there are word lists for German, French, English, Latin, and all the Scandinavian countries and everywhere else. And what I'm going to suggest to you there is that I have had the French one because I've been doing Métis searching for the last few years. And I practically worn out my page. Now the word lists are for the words that are used in the church records. It isn't a general dictionary. The words are primarily those that are found in the current church records. Scroll through this very carefully because I had forgotten. They also have books that you can download. I should have mentioned that, with handwriting styles for many countries. Now, because my personal interests are many records written in German, and I have also the copy of the word lists book that shows the alphabets and the keywords and this sort of thing, but they've added a special feature to now. If you have a word that you're looking for, you type the word in and they will come up with what it looks like in the script, which I think is phenomenal and can be really, really helpful. So that's the real hint of the day. Next. Ancestry also has somehow acquired the same church records, which they have indexed. And of course, the indexing isn't the same as the one in family history. Again, it's either been done by people or even a machine. And of course, the handwriting isn't always the easiest, but it is a very good place to look. All you do is you enter the name on the home page and then check to see. And if there is a church record, it'll tell you it's Saskatchewan baptisms or whatever. Or it may say Manitoba and Saskatchewan church records. And the reason for that is, again, they are, Lac Brochette is in that group, and that's what you're going to find. It also gives you an opportunity. The good thing about this one, as well as with Family Search, is that you can move easily from page to page. So if you're interested in somebody who was baptized in 1898, for instance, you can go backwards and forwards and see the whole range. You can see the whole year's records, kind of idea. So that's the advantage of finding them at Ancestry. Next. Now, before you contact a church, know who you're looking for. If you know all the spelling variations, please supply them. Also, some names, if say you're looking for somebody with the name Elizabeth, you might also add, it could be Beth, it could be Betty, it could be Elsie, it could be, you know, give all the spelling variations, because the person who's doing the searching may not have any sort of understanding like you do. Have a time frame in mind, and bear in mind again that you're looking for a birth date, and they're having to look for a baptism date, and specify which event you're looking for. Sometimes even on the same page, you may find that if it's a child who was baptized and it died shortly thereafter, they may be even on the same page, and you'll be quite happy to have both pieces of information. But be prepared to pay. Do they have an hourly fee or a per event fee? And the reason for this, of course, is that these are clergy or volunteers or people who are being paid by the church, and they're there to do church work. They're not there to do your genealogy. It's a bonus. And I noticed that some of them are charging $40, $30, $50. So it's up to you to do your homework before you contact a church. Next. Now we're going to turn to funeral homes. Funeral homes are private businesses. They have to abide by the Privacy Act. They also have their own privacy rules and regulations to attend to. Many of the small prairie funeral homes have been bought, well, city as well, have now been bought out by big American businesses. There was no law that said they had to leave their business records with the new occupiers of the business. And as a result, some of the early funeral home records are found in the descendants of the only owners of these. Some of them have made their way into the local museums. In Saskatchewan, the local museums tend to only be open in the summer months, but if you're writing them a letter, they still know how to write letters throughout the year, and interested parties would probably know whether they have funeral home records within their collection. And if they're very kind, they may actually go and look things up for you. In the good old days, back in the 80s, we used to take students and branches and visit the funeral homes, and they used to be very happy to show us around. Obviously, they wanted to show their caskets first, but then we spent time afterwards going through their records. The only thing they didn't want to share was how much it cost. Also, bear in mind that up until the end of the 40s, for instance, and maybe later, if there weren't funeral homes in the local community, for instance, around Regina, what they may have done is that when somebody died, they contacted, say, Spears here in Regina, and Spears would send a gentleman and a casket out to the community, and they would look after getting everything ready for the service and the burial. If something that I would like to mention here too, when I'm talking about trains and things, is that there is a book called The Atlas of Saskatchewan, 1969 edition, that has an excellent map of the railroads here in Saskatchewan. And so when you're thinking of these kinds of records, what you want to do is to look to see which way the railroads went. And many, say marriages, for instance, took place in the next province. Often people would have gone to Manitoba or Alberta for medical service and died, and then their bodies were shipped back. And so you can see where the trains are, and maybe where a funeral, the body may have been prepared for a funeral in Manitoba or Alberta. And so maybe you're not looking in the right place for the information you want. Current funeral homes some have obituaries online. And some of these obituaries may go back to when they got the technology to put them online, and they can be there from, say, the year 2000 or even earlier. Funeral homes also may or may not know the location of local cemeteries. It's always kind of a little laugh, because sometimes somebody goes off to the burial place and they have to stop and ask for directions for where the cemetery is. But that's a little country joke. That's not a local thing. Next, we're going to look at cemeteries. And the first place you should look is in the SGS. We've been collecting and recording cemeteries since 1957. Individuals and branches have played a very important role in this, in that they often have the knowledge about these cemeteries. They also have a personal knowledge about the people who were buried there. So although we started recording stones only, they had access to the burial registers. So that kind of information is also part of our cemetery collection. There is a directory online. The directory is excellent. It tells you where the cemetery is located. It'll tell you when it was recorded, how many entries there are, if it's been updated, and all sorts of good stuff. If you're a member, you may find more information about the people who are actually in the cemeteries. We also have a research policy so that they can check the records for you. Next. Oh, okay, it's okay. That's perfect. I want to add one more piece of information. We had an excellent inquiry at the SGS this week about somebody who knows, or the family story was that somebody was buried on the farm, but nobody knew where they were buried on the farm. And they actually got out that machine that could look for them. Now what could they do? Well, on our cemetery site, there are a couple of guides, and one is on private cemeteries, and the other is on historic cemeteries. So do have a look for that. These days, when people are going for cremation, and their cremains are sometimes buried in a cemetery, but sometimes they're scattered all over the place. People will leave a message saying that we buried them up under the nut tree up in the hill. Well, we know from the weather that the nut tree up at the hill may be fine the day you buried them, but the next windstorm it was no longer. So how are you going to find it? So, but we have GPS and all these other wonderful things that can explain exactly where these cremains are found. Another thing you can do is, particularly for the big cemeteries, is contact the cemetery directly. One thing to ask for is a plot location. Another is a burial date. You might often also ask is, are they still there, kind of idea? Have they been moved to another location, and do they know where this other location is? And another thing is to ask about others in the plot, because sometimes people bought a plot, but not everybody necessarily was, for whom the plot was intended necessarily is in the plot. Next. A good place to learn about cemeteries and things within a community are local histories. Again, some of those that produce local histories in the 2000s actually have everybody who's in the cemetery listed in the history book. Another place to look are the RM offices, the rural municipality offices. That's where you were to present yourself with the information when for registrations. And for years and years and years, they had these huge big books that they collected all this information from before they filled in the forms and sent them into Regina. So the RM office also, all of the RM offices have current maps, and they can show you on it, which you can buy, by the way, and they will show you where all these cemeteries that they know about are located. They may also know whether they have been looked after or whether they're abandoned. During the big push for the local histories and the 100-year celebrations, many of the cemeteries have been updated and more stones and things added. When I say added, it means when they were buried initially, maybe they had a wooden cross, which has since disintegrated. And so now, in memory of their families, they are putting new stones down just to recognize where they are. Other sources of information that are online are like Find a Grave. It's free. The information, what they're doing is they're asking people to send photos of the gravestones, which they publish. Sometimes they will not have a picture, but they will have some information about the people. And anyone is able to add to the picture. So sometimes there will be copies of an obituary or a funeral card. They will also say the spouse, the name of the spouse or the name of the children. Sometimes the children are not necessarily in that cemetery, but that's information that's added. And there could be a way if you, if they have a connection to that person in another cemetery, that will take you to where they are buried. Another big group are Billion Graves. This is a fee-for-service place. They too are looking for volunteers. I have found if you put a name in, you may find the information you want there as well. And there's another place called Canadian Headstones. And usually when you're going to Ancestry, they will show that as a source of information. Next, I think that's it. That's it. Okay, we're now open for questions if you have. Oh, where's my hand? Oh.
I'll just ask my question. Laura, you did mention Lutheran records.
Well, the Lutheran records are okay. My fault. I have I had all my notes and they're online, and I couldn't print them off because of computer problems. But anyway, the Lutheran records are found.
In your head.
Okay, the Lutheran records, there are two branches of the Lutheran Church. In tracing, and if you go to the archives page, they give you the addresses of where you can find where the records are. The other thing I wanted to tell you was that at the archives, they have a microfilm of the Lutheran Church records at Neudorf. And they're in German. They are on microfilm. They started in the late 1800s and go up to 1957. Now, because they have the 1957 top line there, I don't know if the microfilm is still available for the public or not, but that is another handy dandy place to look.
Okay.
Because already the 50s, I mean, we're looking at the end of privacy laws. So it probably, you know, it's worth a look. Anyway, I know it's there. I've seen it, and it has tons of good information.
Okay, thank you.
Laura, Deb Higgins is asking for the edition. You mentioned the Atlas of Saskatchewan, but she missed the edition or the year that you mentioned.
1969. It is excellent. It has like these maps I was telling you about. At the end of it, it has a many-page gazetteer that lists every community in Saskatchewan that existed up to 1969 with its land location, which is really important because many have totally disappeared since that period of time. Joan Meyer has a question about recording a cemetery that she's trying to record. Is Joan there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me, Laura?
You can, yes.
Oh, thank you so much. I'll be real quick. I have been searching for this. This is the one you spoke about just at the beginning of your speech here.
Okay.
And I have finally discovered through ground penetrating radar where it is actually located. However, in your cemetery index at SGS, it is not stated at the right place now. How do we go about correcting that? And I would like to have it registered as a historic site.
Well, okay, two things. What you can do is, provide the information to the office, and it will be added to the site, to say that this is what it is and who is buried in it.
Yes.
And the cemetery, whichever government department is in charge of cemeteries, they will be able to tell you more about registering it.
Okay, and I have to find that.
Check with the office, because I mean we have worked for years, have worked with whichever department, and I forget. I know I attended some of the first meetings, but when they were doing the Cemetery Act, we had a big part of that. And but I know Norm Stetner used to go to those, and so that we have a very good relationship with that particular area, and they would certainly give you the information about that.
Okay, I'll do that. It's important, I think, because SaskTel has something very close to there, right in the middle, actually. So they should know, so they can't dig again. And it's situated right close to the, from CPR. They're, they're on both sides. There's a space that belongs to them. And this is right on that edge.
Right.
So we have to record it as a heritage site so nobody digs in there.
Well, I mean, the government too will be able to tell you about that. But I mean, as soon as anybody finds out about a burial place, everything has to cease. And I think they send out archaeological people to, you know, confirm and this sort of thing. But no, that's absolutely correct. I mean, in the old days, it was everything was grown over and nobody knew and nobody looked either. So I think what you're saying is most important. And
Yes.
the thing is that when we also started the cemetery project, I mean, we started with the local communities. Even in 1975, some were starting to go downhill. But when SAS Power put in the power lines and things, you know, they were discovered lots of cemeteries at that point in time. And not everybody remembers all these, you know, cemeteries that are out on in farm fields and this sort of thing.
Another last question. I was wondering, if I make it a historic site, does it put some onus on the landowner about what he can do and what he shouldn't do? And should I talk to him as well?
I talking to him doesn't I mean, is it really important? But whether I don't know about the rules and regulations about that, because I know that at Sedley out on the farm, there's an old cemetery called Andreasheim, and right now the current owner has taken down the fences and the cattle are running over the stones that are in there, and they're having a real devil of a time with, you know, either having it fenced or whatever. So those are things I do not know, you know, what the advice should be. But I mean, talk to the cemetery people and check with the office maybe too, who can put you on to whoever is the person to talk to.
Okay, thank you so much, Laura.
You're welcome.
Okay, there's a comment from Anne Edmonds, says, very enlightening. Thanks. Husband is adopted and his birth grandparents are from Bounty. We live in the United States.
Does she know where Bounty is?
And
Is it?
are you there, Anne? I'm not sure. Okay. Next question is from Joanne Montgomery. How does one access ground penetrating radar services?
Maybe Joan can answer that. I don't know.
Yes, I can. I just happened to have stumbled on this young fellow who did a ground penetrating radar research on old church out in Saskatchewan just last year. It was in the newspaper. So all I did was I contacted him, and maybe they'd have to get in contact with me because I don't know if he wants, but he has his own business and that's what he does. And he's the one I hired.
Good. Thank you.
Okay.
So I'm the one who asked the question. I'm trying to figure out who was talking to contact them.
Joan Meyer.
Joan Meyer.
Right.
How do I get hold of you?
Well, I can give you my email. Would you like my email?
Sure.
Okay, it's J Meyer, Meyer,
Yep.
at myaccess.ca.
My access, ACCESS, like the word X,
Right.
access or not access,
Right.
.ca, myaccess.ca. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Jody is asking, is the 1969 Atlas of Saskatchewan available to borrow at SGS?
That I can't tell you for sure. It's a little oversized book, so that I
Yeah.
mean, you could go in but it's in most public libraries in the province.
Yeah.
So that you know, try that. But we definitely have a copy in the library, and whether I don't know, it's maybe too big to mail, but
Yeah.
you can go in and borrow it in person.
Okay, Pat White mentions cemeteries are under the jurisdiction of the Financial and Consumer Affairs Authority of Saskatchewan.
Thank you.
Greg Nelson, does anyone have information on accessing hospital records? Example, deaths, or what else might be available to the general public?
That again, it falls under the Privacy Act, and they don't necessarily have that information anymore. You have to go through the other channels, but it's always worth a try. But I wouldn't bank on it. Having said that, the records from the Weyburn Mental Hospital, as they used to call it, are in the archives. When they close, that's where the records are found. Again, those are records that you cannot go through yourself, but if you know that somebody was there during a particular time or died there, or whatever, they will look it up for you. On the other hand, the cemetery from that was attached to the mental health authority is available online.
Okay, are there any further questions? Did I miss anybody? Go ahead and speak up if you have a question.
Is there anybody who can add to it? We're always looking to learn. This is not just one way here.
Yeah, you bet. Sharing information, great. Well, pretty quiet. Okay, well, thank you very much, Laura. That was a very informative presentation. Learned lots myself too, and I'm sure everybody else did as well. I see we got another comment here. Oh, just a thank you from Kathleen.
I see that somebody has asked a question here about the Fort San records. That I do not know about, but always ask at the archives or to see, because the archives are your special friends. They're the keepers of the records for Saskatchewan, and maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but that's a good place to start.
Okay, any more questions? All right, we've come to the end of our time this morning then, and I hope you've all enjoyed the session. We have one more coming up before the summer break, and that will be April 9th. And it's going to be on military records with Thelma Caldwell. I'd also like to just take a minute to mention that the Saskatchewan Genealogical Society Annual General Meeting is coming up on April 23rd. So mark your calendars. We will have a guest speaker prior to the AGM. She's going to be talking about the 7 habits of a highly organized genealogist. So that should be interesting. And pre-registration is required for both the presentation and the annual meeting. And in order to vote at the annual meeting, you'll need to be an SGS member in good standing. So we hope to see you out there. It'll be on Zoom again this year. So hopefully next year, maybe we can get together and have a bit of a conference, but we're gonna just be cautious this year and proceed with a Zoom annual meeting. So thank you again, Laura. Thanks, Shelley, for your help. And thanks everybody for coming out this morning. Hopefully we can enjoy the rest of our weekends and look forward to some nice spring weather coming up. Have a good weekend, everybody.
Thank you.